it's one of those fundamental things, and the concept of moral turpitude derives greatly from the idea that there are natural laws, things that, thou shalt not kill, things that are have their origins in religion or religious doctrine, or have been followed for so long throughout history that they're part of our collective unconscious. Basically, we know that these things are wrong. Rape, for instance. Now, crimes that involve moral turpitude vary in definition, but you can always guarantee that crimes without moral turpitude involved are going to involve some sort of statute or ordinance. Now, the book seems to suggest that crimes of moral turpitude aren't written into statutes and ordinances, and I disagree with that. For the most part, there's no longer a concept of moral turpitude when it comes to whether or not something is in the statutes. Typically, if it's a crime, it will be in the statutes. And we'll talk a little bit more about the development of crimes so you can get a better picture of that. Examples of crimes without moral turpitude, and I'm just going to give you simple ones: speeding, fines, parking tickets. It just varies as far as, you can pretty much think we're talking about things without moral turpitude. We're talking about things that when you think about it being a crime, it doesn't give you a visceral sense that it should be a crime. Or at least not as strongly of a visceral sense. Nice thing about crimes, and this is for most states, is they're split up into misdemeanors and felonies. If this is a timeline, if the crime is punishable by a fine or less than a year of jail time, it's usually classified as a misdemeanor. Felonies, on the other hand, are more than a year and generally have a specific time of confinement beyond that year, and could actually include death. Felonies, big crimes, bad crimes. Misdemeanors, bad but not that bad. And we're going to talk about it, but there are different levels of each of these that speak to the heinousness of the crime. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on the distinction that I have in the slides on general part of criminal law versus specific part of criminal law, because I think to bifurcate in that way is a bit arbitrary. crimes have a few things in common, and those are the general parts of criminal law, the commonality, versus the specific parts of criminal law which only apply to specific crimes. Some of the examples that are on the slide, as far as general applicability, is being an accomplice of a crime, being an accessory, inchoate offenses, attempt, conspiracy, and solicitation, for instance, and we're going to go through all of these. But those are the inchoate offenses. With defenses, we generally see justifications, and excuses. For instance, I was justified in cutting his arm because I was in the process of saving his life, as a justification. Compared to special parts of criminal law, crimes against persons, crimes against property, crimes against public order and morals, and crimes against the state itself. So where does criminal law come from? You'll find most criminal law comes from the state. So from the legislature. I've told most of my paralegal students this, and I'll tell everyone this that wasn't in my class, one of my classes last semester. We have a federal system, which means that the states are little sovereign entities upon themselves. They've delegated a little bit of their authority to the United States government, the federal government. Of the authority that was delegated to the federal government by the Constitution, crimes was not high on the list. Very few crimes are authorized under the Constitution. Rather, states set their own criminal codes, and it could vary from state to state. Rape, for instance, might be a certain age, statutory rape, might be a certain age in one state, a different age in another. The acts may be identical, but whether you're in one state or the other might be different. And that differs from some other federal systems. For instance, Brazil has at the federal level, the power to create crimes, and in fact or define crimes. And in fact, most of the crimes are actually defined at the federal level, so that if you go from one state to the next in Brazil, you're not wondering whether or not what you're doing is a crime. So we have the state government, and again, the federal government does have some authority. Treason probably being the #1 defined crime in the Constitution. And then you also have local ordinances. Local ordinances, depending on what state you're in, some of them, like Florida for instance, we have non-criminal offenses when it comes to local ordinance violations. So you will go to county court, but it's not going to be considered a crime or a misdemeanor. Rather, it's a non-criminal offense, so it's not even a misdemeanor. And it just depends on what state you're in as to whether or not the local ordinance is going to bring you up to the level of criminal liability. The states have common law or judicially defined laws, case law. Now, of course, Louisiana doesn't have that for the most part because of its civil law nature. And even in the common law states, it's becoming less and less likely that if you're to commit a crime that it's one that was that comes through common law. Most crimes now are put in the statutes. Federal law does not have judge-made law. Federal law does not have a common law. An exception, and I don't mention this in the slide, but an exception is when the federal government is trying a case that has both federal and state issues. What's going to happen is the federal government is going to apply the state common law for the state portions of the crime. So in effect, the federal government is using common law to come up with a verdict, but it's really the state's common law that it's sort of borrowing for its own. By itself, though, if it were just a federal crime, there is no such thing as common law. Like I said, the trend was common law originally, and that made sense. You know, you're out in the middle of nowhere, you have a city of a couple of thousand people, you're not going to start creating statutes. You're going to just have judges hearing things and judges deciding, well, you know, back in old England, when you set a house ablaze and part of that house turned black, then you have arson. Well, now you typically have a statute that says arson is, and then it gives the specific requirements for the crime of arson. As time has progressed, we've gotten more and more toward using model penal codes to try and put the same laws throughout the country, so that when you go state to state, you're not completely confused as to what the laws are. This has helped a lot. The American Law Institute in 1962 came up with the Model Penal Code. It's the American Law Institute. Of course, like most model codes, when a state gets it, they're like, it has a couple of good things here and there, but no, 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 yes, no, no. Let me change a few words of this one. So you're not going to get exactly what the American Law Institute put out. Rather, you're going to get a hodgepodge of states, the state's own laws, and the Model Penal Code. When we talk about local ordinance, and I'll just talk about this briefly, when we talk about local ordinance, generally the state will preempt the local government.